The game doesn't even need the team affiliations to it. Everyone knows what we're talking about, and that's how I've opened every live stream, every video. Just the game. That's all that needs to be said, and we can take it from there. Another Ohio State Michigan edition here. We got Zach Smith here, Menace to Sports. You guys should be aware. I'm sure like 99.9% of you are. If you're not, you will see it on the banner right there. Follow Zach, of course, at Twitter and also menacetosports.com, and in a show every weekday, noon Eastern time, right here on YouTube. Zach, how you doing today?
I'm great, man. It's good to be back with you.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. Appreciate your time. And you've been involved in this. So the rest of us watch. We know some of the intensity, the message boards and the social media is crazy, but to be right in the middle of the battle's another deal. So can you talk about the intensity of what this one's like? Football's intense regardless, but this one is just through the roof.
It's like nothing I've ever seen. And, I was at Florida for 5 years. I saw Florida, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Florida State. And even growing up, my grandfather was a coach at Ohio State. So I was pretty dang close to the rivalry as a kid, but you just have no idea. And when I got hired at Ohio State, I walked in like, oh, I know this rivalry. Like, I've been a part of this my whole life. I've watched it. I've been close to it. I've been to the games. You get on the inside and what this week feels like for a coach, for a player, it's like nothing I've ever experienced. It's almost too hard to explain, but they do a great job with the brainwashing, the year-round winter workouts, doing a team up north period, and they have an Ohio period, and it's just this hatred that's built up to when the day you walk in the facility on Sunday, everything feels different. Like you could cut the air with a knife, like the tension and the electricity and just, Michigan jerseys on the floors, block M's in the urinals, just like everything you do. And then they play that stupid Time for War song on repeat in the facility where by the end of the week, you've lost your mind. You've officially went insane. And you walk out in the game and pregame and everything feels different. Like the hairs on your arms stand up like, whoa, this is crazy.
Zach, I told this story the other day. It's a brief one, but I can't explain it because I didn't grow up in a sports family. I was the first one that played football, played baseball, played sports, watched sports, memorized everything, was one of those that something got into me at about 8 years old that I just couldn't get enough of it, play it, watch it, and everything. And the first Michigan-Ohio State memory I had was Bo Schembechler being carried off the field at Ohio Stadium, and my fist was like in the TV screen. I was so angry. And that's the first Michigan-Ohio State game I ever watched. And I didn't even know where that came from. I guess it's in the water or something. But the intensity is crazy. I've had to explain it to my son because he grew up during Buckeye dominance.
Yeah.
So he's like, isn't Wisconsin a bigger Michigan State? Aren't they bigger Penn State? Aren't they bigger? Right. And I'd have to show him the hype videos and go, you just don't understand. And he go, yeah, I get the history, but it's just not happening. Now he gets it after 2 consecutive years of losses.
Yeah.
It's hit home.
Yeah. Well, and for me, it was the opposite, right? Like I was 3 years old when my grandfather got fired and John Cooper came in, who had I think a 2-10 record, 2-10-1 or something like that against Michigan. So really from the time I was 3 until I was a junior in high school, Michigan just always won. Like it was Michigan dominance. And then they obviously fired John Cooper, hired Jim Tressel, who was a family friend of ours. And it's funny, I was raised a Michigan fan. They fired my grandfather. All my aunts thought it was cool to get me to say go blue and root for Michigan. And then Jim Tressel gets hired and he's a family friend and they all just went back to loving Ohio State. I'm like, wait a minute. I've been brainwashed my whole life to like Michigan. How do you just switch?
I love the story that Chris Spielman used to tell about going on a recruiting visit to Michigan with no intent of signing, but just, hey, I'll take my visit. And his dad said something to him like, if you come back here and you've signed with Michigan, don't expect to ever walk in this house again.
It just means more. It really does. I mean, and that's why there's so much heat on Ryan Day. Here's a guy that's went to the playoffs 3 times, the Natty once, only lost 6 games, and people are like, he's going to get fired this year. You're like, what?
So let's clear that up. He's not getting fired, winning 11 games a year.
No, absolutely not. I mean, now he's going to be very disliked if they don't win, but he's not getting fired.
Yeah. So let's let's dig into this a little bit more with just the intensity of this year. So again, we've taken it down memory lane, and I remember games in the late 80s when Ohio State was down in that Earl Bruce into John Cooper transition, where to me, it still meant the world. It was more important than the Super Bowl, and Ohio State would walk out there one year 4-6-1 in 88. And still, to me personally, so you've already got that intensity of just the bragging rights and the pride. But now we've got championship level teams. We've got 11-0, 11-0. We got the cheating on one side. We've got all of this, the intensity, and losing 2 consecutive years after owning the rivalry. I don't know how this can get any bigger or more hyped.
Yeah, I don't think it can. I think this is going to be the biggest game, certainly in rivalry history, maybe in college football history, outside of some national championship games that were great games. I mean, you think about Ohio State and Michigan. This is the 14th time that both teams have been top 5 teams and they played. Ohio State owns that 7-5-1, in case anyone was wondering. But I think the crazy stat to me was the road team in a top 5 matchup in this rivalry has only won 2 out of 13 of those games. One was last year. Michigan won at the Horseshoe. The other was 1975 with Archie Griffin in his second Heisman year. So what Ohio State's attempting to do is it's a tall task to take down a top 5 team in a rivalry on the road. I mean, it's just, and you couple that with the fact that next year, moving forward for the rest of our lives, this game won't mean as much because there's 12 teams getting the playoffs. Loser of this game still goes. I believe loser of this game this year is out. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, barring some chaos that we just can't even fathom. So this game, I think, is the biggest game, certainly in the history of the rivalry.
Yeah, we're going to have to savor this because we all grew up with this game meaning everything, and it's only played once. And we're looking at 3 times possibly.
Right.
And just the thought of, Zach, and I don't want to take us to 2024 for too long, but just the thought of knowing, how many times, and certainly the last 2 years, it would be one thing if, let's say, one team in the future had a Big Ten championship game spot secured and the other one had to win. They were tied with Penn State and USC or whatever in the standings. And so there was still something on the line. But the last 2 years, they both would have been there anyway. So the rematch is already set. Can you imagine sitting players and thinking, okay, well, we don't need to win this week. We got to win next week.
Yeah.
I don't know how they get around that.
I don't know how they do either. I think I hope USC, Washington, Oregon, I hope those teams can really play well to make at least this game matter, because you're going to have to play Washington or Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. That's my hope, but it's tough. I mean, you kind of saw it, and although it wasn't certain, you saw it 2 years ago when Bama played Georgia in the SEC championship game, where you said, all right, they're both making it. It doesn't matter what happens here. And it's almost inevitable. Like, they both should make the national championship game. So what do you do? And you obviously saw them split, and Georgia won the right one.
Absolutely. Zach Smith's here, Menace to Sports. We appreciate Zach being here, breaking things down for us. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of the football on the field. We'll start with the obvious. Let's go to Kyle McCord. Have you seen progression from week to week? Where do you think his season's gone?
I don't want to make it a stat response, but I like to look right now, this late in the season, especially a first-time starter, at how they've been the last 4 or 5 weeks, right? I don't care how they played against Notre Dame or Indiana game 1, because there's a massive maturation process for a first-time starter like Kyle McCord. And right now, over the month of November, really further than that, the last 4 weeks, Kyle McCord's first in the Big Ten in almost everything: completion percentage, touchdowns, deep ball percentage, everything. JJ McCarthy's middle tier. I mean, he's 6th in completion percentage, 6th in yards per attempt, 11th completion percentage versus blitz. So you've seen the tale of 2 different quarterbacks. One that started out extremely hot, Heisman contender against absolute dog water competition, and the other kid who's trying to figure it out, trying to learn how to be a big-time starting quarterback. I think he's played a lot better, but I think those stats tell somewhat of a false narrative, because excuse me, when I break down the games, he still is he's not 100% confident in the pocket. He skips through his reads too fast and doesn't let plays develop. but and he still has some turnover worthy throws, which he can't do any of that in this game, or they're going to lose.
So how do you approach that if you see the same things from him in practice, and that may not even be valid because he may be clean in practice, who knows?
Right.
Do you let him like cut loose on a first throw and see one of those, every so often you'll see straight down the sideline, just let the quarterback just air one out, or do you let him check down for a few plays? Of course, you rely on the running game to kind of ease him into the game.
See, so if I'm Ryan Day and I'm going into this game, the first play, certainly the first series, I'm running a run play with an RPO fade to Marv. And if you get press coverage one-on-one, just throw a 50-50 ball up. Just launch it down the field. Let them know you're not scared to throw it down the field. With Marvin Harrison Jr., 50-50 ball is more like 70-30. So if they want to come up and play man on Marv, I'm doing that. And they did it last year. They played man on him last year, and I'm doing that. And if they don't, then just run the ball and let the game flow start. Let Kyle get comfortable. But if they give it to you early, I'm taking it. And even if you don't complete it, it just sends a message like, yeah, we're doing this. We're taking shots.
Offensive line obviously had some early concerns, just the exact opposite in some respects to what we saw last year. But recently, the offensive line looks good. Got to take the defensive competition into consideration, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But what are you seeing up front?
Yeah, I mean, they're night and day from what they were early in the year. I mean, Josh Simmons, the left tackle, is a completely different player. They have two liabilities on the offensive line. Josh Fryer, the right tackle, is not very athletic. He's a little stiff. He's not great in pass pro. And then Carson Hinsman, their center, has been very inconsistent. He's actually been benched a couple times. They're trying to figure out the best five, really, with this game in mind. Like, we got to get our best five ready to play in this game. I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Jones is a starting center and Carson Hinsman isn't one of the five in this game. But they've improved. They've improved. And I think some of the defenses they played, I think Maryland has a really good defense. Penn State, obviously. I mean, they've gotten better and better. I think Penn State without Travion Henderson was tough. They didn't run the ball well, but Travion, man, he looks like a different player than he looked last year or early this year.
Exactly. You're picking it up right where I was taking this thing. Travion Henderson, nobody would argue with the talent. He comes out of high school. He's number 1 rated in the country. He picks up 1,200 yards, but it was seemed like a very easy 1,200 yards as a freshman. He split the seams. He, is all finesse yardage. Still awesome. But man, especially in that Rutgers game, this guy's looking for contact now. He just looks like something got in him. Maybe it was the injury made him just feel like he couldn't initiate contact, and he just was a bit scared out there, where now, man, he's lowering shoulders into guys.
He really is. He's the best I've seen on tape this year anywhere at making linemen right. There's a lot to be said about that. And I used to talk about it with receiver play, like this massive jump in receiver production at Ohio State that just so happened to coincide with NFL talent at quarterback, right? Lines play better when backs make them right. And Travion makes this offensive line right so often. He helps them set up blocks. And when they miss a block or don't have a great block, he finds a way to find a crease and still get through there and not get tackled. Because no one remembers that. If their left guard kind of misses a block and Travion makes a jump cut and gets in a crease and gains 12 yards, no one's like, God, the left guard sucks. No, they're like, oh man, great run, move on. So he just makes this offensive line right so much.
Zach, I really liked Dallin Hayden and what he showed last year. They were forced into giving him the ball against Purdue. Do you think he becomes a factor in this game as a change-up at all?
They certainly can play him. I know they're trying to redshirt him, but he hasn't played 4 yet, so they can play him. The biggest issue they have with Dallin is not when they hand him the ball. It's everything else. I mean, he doesn't fully grasp pass protection yet. In the one game he did play earlier in the year before they announced they were going to redshirt him, he missed like 5 pass pros that almost got Kyle killed. And so it's more kind of that, can we trust him in the plethora of our offense more so than how is he as a back? And I think he's certainly gotten better at that, but I just don't think he's going to play a lot with that in mind. I mean, in this game, you're going to put a guy out there that your shaky confidence level on how he's going to do in pass pro and lead blocking and all the other things you ask him to do. I don't think they do that.
Yeah. or send a message to the defense. Dallin Hayden's getting the ball because he's in the
Right.
game, and that's all he can
Right.
do. Marvin Harrison is almost so good, we don't really need to talk about him because he's a given. So I'm going to go to Emeka Buka first because he was so good last year. Obviously, he's not had the season that we would have expected because of the injury. How important is it that he provides some respect on that side of the field? And what have you seen out of him since he's been back?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about time for him to at least return to form, because I think a lot of his, I mean, he obviously had the injury that he dealt with, but I think a lot of his lack of production, or maybe what you would call a down year, has been quarterback play. I mean, he went from a guy that's going to win Rookie of the Year to a guy who's just, above average this year in college football. So I think it's time, especially if they give extra attention to Marv. Somebody else has to take off. Someone has to, and if not him, I really love what I see out of the freshman Carnell Tate. He doesn't play a ton, maybe 20 snaps a game, 15 snaps a game, but man, he reminds me of Chris Olave as a freshman so much. Same number, so it's easy to fall into that bias. But if you remember Chris Olave's freshman year, he every now and then had a catch, and then all of a sudden against Michigan, blocked a punt, huge touchdown, massive 2 touchdowns, massive impact in the game.
Zach Smith's here. Menace the Sports. We're breaking down the game, noon Eastern time, of course, on Saturday. I'll just keep ripping through some offensive players because I'm curious to get your thoughts. Xavier Johnson, of course, there's interesting ways in which they use him. He seems to be just a dude that shows up in the clutch and makes 1 or 2 plays in big spots.
It's always in the big games. Like you'll go through the Rutgers game or the Purdue game, and you're like, I don't even know if he played. But sure enough, Notre Dame, you need a big play, he'll give you 2 of them. I mean, it's every year. Last year, Notre Dame, the same. I mean, he's a kid that I don't know if he's underutilized or if he just shows up in big moments, but versatile skill set. I mean, he's kind of a running back, not Curtis Samuel. He's not as good as Curtis Samuel, but similar skill set where you can hand him counter, you can hand him a sweep, you could run a route with him. I think he provides an interesting mismatch for anybody.
Zach, is this the week to put in anything different? Or do you confuse guys, or do you maybe a few things that you can do differently that Michigan's never seen?
Yeah, I mean, Michigan, not that they ever weren't, but they certainly were off-season studied ad nauseum this offseason. And they, Ohio State, when I was there, even we always studied Michigan in the spring and in June, just to kind of have some thoughts on paper for when you got to game week. You could go open up your notebook and say, what was I thinking in June when I broke them down? Obviously, you have a whole season's worth of film on top of what you thought in the summer. So they're going to have little wrinkles like you do every week. I mean, you game plan a defense every week and put in little wrinkles that you love against what they do defensively. You just might have more well thought out ones this week.
I just realized I've got a blue jacket on. There's going to be people that are going to be pissed off at me for wearing a blue jacket. No. I just got cold. I grabbed a jacket. Okay. Jim Knowles in this defense, they look for real.
Yeah, they are. They really are. I think they're the best defense in the country. The defensive line's outstanding. The 2 things they don't do is they don't disrupt the offense, right? They don't have many tackles for loss. They don't get home on the quarterback and sack the quarterback a bunch. But man, are they efficient. I mean, yards per play, the number 1 overall defense in the country. I think they are for real. And I just love their secondary. Not having Lathan Ransom hurts. He was a really good player. But Sonny Styles, the versatility he has to slide back there and play deep safety, was playing walkout. Like, I think they're just a solid defense, and Michigan has struggled to throw the ball. You're going to tell me in a one-dimensional offense is going to move the ball on this defense? I just don't buy it.
We got Zach Smith for another 15 or 20. Folks, leave your comments and questions for Zach, and of course, Menace to Sports. And I saw the headline. I've been too busy here to check any of it out. JJ McCarthy, mid?
He's played mid the last 4 weeks. Let's put it that way. I think JJ's a good quarterback. The Heisman talk and best in the country, this completion percentage, he was playing well against nobody. I mean, nobody playing defensive football. And the last, 3 weeks, they played a good defense. Obviously, maybe not as good as people thought. I still think he's a good player. And I thought he was average last year, whereas he's been above average this year, and he still went nuclear against Ohio State last year. So it's not any indication that he's not going to play well this weekend, but I think he's got inflated early in the year against some bad teams. And he's kind of returned true to form.
So, Zach, what Michigan's been able to do on the ground the last 2 seasons in this game, Hassan Haskins 2 years ago, and of course, Donovan Edwards last year. Is that something where Ohio State just needs to man up, or is this the differences that Jim Knowles has made on defense? Is that going to address the run game too?
Oh yeah, it'll address. I think Tommy Eichenberg is one of the best linebackers as long as he's healthy. He didn't play last week, but everything I've heard is that he's back full health. But it absolutely will address some of that. But I think the biggest thing that no one wants to talk about is you took an offensive line that was a Joe Moore Award winner 2 years in a row, and they are not the same. You watch the film, they are not even close to the same. They're still a good offensive line, but best in the country, the 2 lines I watched the last 2 years, not even remotely close. So I know they've been able to run the ball to an extent. I thought Penn State did a really good job stopping their run game, if we're being honest. Outside of a couple plays where they lost contain, they did a good job against their run game. And Michigan's offensive line had no answer for Penn State up front. I think Ohio State has the advantage up front when they're on defense this year.
Any players, let's go back to the linebacker position because there was thought that there was some drop off early. Do you think that's been corrected?
Yes, that's the position group I worry about still, but they've definitely improved. Steel Chambers is a guy that kind of looked lost in coverage every now and then, wasn't phenomenal. Tommy's kind of a mismatch if you get the right guy on him. But Jim Knowles does a great job with his safeties, playing low, playing aggressive, so they have a ton of help in the throw game. They're not asked, like we watched Tuff Borland try to cover Devontae Smith in the national championship game. That's never going to happen with Jim Knowles as the coordinator. So I feel good about how Jim Knowles takes care of those guys, but they're certainly not like Georgia. When you cut on Georgia's linebackers, you're like, whoa, they might be able to cover wideouts.
Yeah. JTT, we saw what he was able to do against Penn State, of course, a year ago, and that's his classic game on tape. But largely, he makes an impact. Is he the level of player that you expected, or can we see him doing more disruptive plays in the backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I thought last year that at the end of last year, I thought he was good, and he flashed certainly in the Penn State game, and I thought he was going to have a massive level up this year. And I think he's pretty dominant in the run game, but just the pass rush isn't there from either defensive end. Jack Sawyer's playing really well right now, but they're just not getting home a lot. And I watch them pass rush. It's a lot of bull rushes, not a lot of speed up the field. Some of these teams out like Penn State, you watch Chop Robinson get off the ball, and you're like, how are you going to block that guy in pass protection? You watch JTT, you're like, okay, you just got to be strong, make sure he doesn't bull rush you. And other than that, he's decent. So I think we could see a lot more out of him when it comes to rushing the passer.
So, Zach, you're a guy that's been on the sidelines to experience this, but then also watching Michigan operate the last 2 games without Harbaugh, and they did the first 3 games, of course. So they had some prep. They understood, a lot of people came at me talking about how, well, the Big Ten threw this at them and they're not prepared and that's not fair. And I'm like, well, if they're not prepared after what has been going down for a month, plus that they were suspended for 3 games to begin the season, well, if they don't have a game plan for that, then they're morons. So we're in a situation where you've been able to see this for a couple of weeks now with Sharon Moore on the sideline. Do you think that has really impacted them on the field?
I do. I think he calls the game differently without Jim Harbaugh. I mean, you watched last week against really 2 weeks ago against Penn State. They struggled in pass pro a little bit, and those are his guys now. His offensive linemen are getting beat in pass pro, and they go out the second half and don't throw a pass. And it's like, I don't think that would ever happen if Jim Harbaugh's there. Now, they won the game. That's all that really matters. But they struggled again last week throwing the football. And it's I think there is at least some impact not having Harbaugh on the sideline when it comes to offensive play calling, because I saw it with Urban. It happens with Harbaugh. They're not calling the plays, but they'll give some encouragement to do something, right? Like, hey, we need to throw the ball a little more. Hey, take a shot right here. Like, they'll give like what they want to do, but they want the coordinator to call it, and they'll interject wherever they feel like they need to. And I think that's where Sharon Moore's missing, where they go out and they're running the ball 5-6 times in a row, and a guy like Jim Harbaugh will be like, hey, this set up that play action. Let's run that boot. Let's do this, and just give him a nudge in his play calling. I think you see a big difference schematically on what they're doing, or play calling, really, what they're doing the last 2 games versus what they did when Harbaugh was on the sideline.
So a big difference, even though Harbaugh's there all the time and he can sit down with Sharon Moore and everybody else and say, this is how I want this game to be called. And if you're in, he can't play out every scenario, but he
Right.
can give some kind of a framework.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those conversations happen, and I'm sure he's had those conversations specifically this week because you're not going to go in and not throw a pass in the second half and beat Ohio State. That's not going to happen. It's not how they did it last year. I mean, JJ threw a number of great throws, especially in pressure situations, zero coverages where JJ shined, and I think you're going to have to do that to beat Ohio State. So I'm sure they've had those conversations. I just worry that it's that crutch where you get in the flow of the game, and it's like, yeah, Harbaugh said that on Tuesday, but it's Saturday. The bullets are flying. I don't like that. I don't like throwing the ball right now.
What do you see out of Michigan's defense? Obviously, they have yet to be challenged against anyone. We thought Penn State would, but Drew Aller certainly wasn't up to it, nor the play calling or the wide receiver threats that they don't have to that degree. Where do you think this Michigan defense is?
Well, I mean, I think we saw Penn State running on them, and that just gave you kind of a window into their soul that it's possible to run the football on them. Because before Penn State, it's like no one can run the ball on them. So Penn State gave us that glimpse, and then Taulia Tagovailoa threw the ball on him. He threw 2 picks, but outside of those 2 picks, he was outstanding. Those 2 picks were the difference, and obviously those count. But it just showed that without those turnover-worthy throws, you could throw it on them and you could run it on them. And I think Ohio State has a better run game than Penn State and a better throw game than Maryland. So I think Ohio State has a chance to fare pretty well moving the football on this defense.
Do you foresee Michigan doing anything like a bracket on Marv to really shut him down, take him out of the game?
I mean, I'm sure they certainly have a contingency plan to do that. It's just hard on defense to do that, and unless it's a known passing situation, because you're taking 2 guys out, you're going to be short in the run game no matter how you cut it. And so with Ohio State running the ball the way they've run the ball, and watching Penn State run the ball on Michigan, I don't know how you commit 2 guys to Marv unless you say it's that important. Like, let them run the ball on us. We cannot let Marv beat us. I just don't see how they can do it.
And we haven't even talked about Cade Stover, and he's just turned into an elite pass catcher at tight end.
Yeah.
So there's another weapon.
There is. And if you really study how Michigan's been shutting down offenses, I mean, going back to Brevin Spanford at Minnesota had 1 catch for 0 yards. The tight end hasn't done a tight end hasn't done much against Michigan until last week. Maryland's Corey Dyche has caught 5 balls, kept the chains moving, and really Maryland relied on their tight end position quite a bit to just get them out of stuff, right? Like they're trying to take a shot, it's not there. The tight end was there, and they were able to keep the ball progressing because of the tight end.
Zach, we appreciate you being here, man. This is good stuff. Love to get the football breakdown. Menace the Sports is the place to be, folks. Monday through Friday, of course, right here on YouTube, 12 to 2 Eastern. Zach, enjoy the game. I'm sure you will have the bullets firing at you as you do each and every day with both of these fan bases going at it.
Oh, they're going at it, man. And I'm just caught in the middle like crazy.
All right, Zach, appreciate you being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
All right, great stuff from Zach Smith. Yeah, love the breakdown. Always appreciate him being here. Talking college football, talking Ohio State, Michigan. No reason to get into anything else. Although we will with you. We'll be here for the next few minutes. We got Best Damn Media dropping by to break down more Ohio State, Michigan. I'll leave the link in the chat as well. We've got a busy day here at the Voice of College Football. You kidding me? We have been at it since about 10:30 this morning. We've recorded Auburn and Alabama. We've recorded South Carolina and Clemson takes. We did a TCU Oklahoma take earlier. We went live with our Buckeyes guys. Catch that show, 11 a.m. Eastern, over on the Ohio State channel. Check that out. We've got Nebraska Live coming up at 4 Eastern. And oh, yeah, I've got to run over to Michigan podcast at 3:15 with Steve Dace. And so we've got that going as well. Let me make sure folks have the link that they need. There we go. All right. Also, Steve Merrill of Wager Talk stopped by. We recorded all those segments, so you will have the betting line and the lean on all the big games and matchups across college football. So be looking out for those segments to be coming out here in the next day or so on all the various channels. Let's see what you guys are talking about here in the chat. We've got about a half hour to go if need be. And like we talked about on the Ohio State show, I got to tell you that I have never seen it to this degree. And I know we've only been around social media for a short time during this rivalry, but I've never seen it to this degree because of the cheating deal and that scandal and that NCAA investigation and what the Big Ten has done to Michigan. But then again, the evidence is there, so the Big Ten made its move. And I know that both fan bases will be armed and ready, regardless of the result, to give an excuse. And I'm not talking about every specific Ohio State fan or every specific Michigan fan. I'm talking about certain ones. So we will be here to take it all in. This is what we're planning on Saturday. We will do some pregame. That's not like me, because my television flips on at noon Eastern every Saturday. I don't watch any pregame. I do other things. I work out. I hang out with friends, go to breakfast, do all those other things with my pregame on Saturday, because I'm going to see enough football from midnight or noon to midnight to fill up my day that I don't need to hear from anyone else. But knowing about all the attention on this game, we figured, okay, let's cut loose with some pregame and take your calls on Saturday. Then I'll pop in at halftime and we'll run the temperature of the room at halftime of Ohio State and Michigan. And then our post game will look like this. I'll be on right after the game as soon as the clock strikes 00. Regardless of the winner, I will be here, Ohio State, Michigan post-game, and then we will hand it off to John D'Adamo for Michigan-specific post-game right here at the Voice of College Football. We've got a realistic prediction right there from Stray Dog, Ohio State 62, Michigan 0. We have arrived at this point a bit different than I anticipated, meaning that Michigan is coming off this lackluster game against Maryland, but Michigan fans have reminded us, and it should be reminded, that the Illinois game was not pretty last year. That could have been a runaway in the first half, but Blake Corum went down. Michigan failed to score right before halftime. Illinois got back into it, and that was a really good Illinois defense, at least, that brought it at the big house. And that was a near upset going into the game. And Ohio State, of course, had its issues with Maryland a year ago going into the game. I don't think that the impact of Maryland and what happened against Michigan is really going to impact this game, other than just the straight nuts and bolts analysis of the football and what Maryland was able to do and what Michigan failed to do against Maryland, I think is legitimate. And I do think it's valid to spin that toward this game. We have dropped the link in the chat. I will do it one more time. Pardon my spelling if there's a typo there, but the link's in the chat if you want to join the show. And we are awaiting Best Damn Media to show up to talk some more Ohio State and Michigan. Keep in mind, we've got an hour earlier this week with Steve Dace. Check out that live show. We've got a Michigan live show with John D'Adamo that aired Tuesday night. We've got our Ohio State show that we did this morning with our Ohio State guys, Kevin Noon, Tony Gerdeman, and Steve Hellwagon. Check that out. You guys have asked me to do as much Ohio State, Michigan coverage as possible, and that's what we've aimed to deliver. We also did a segment with Nelson Hubble of Maize and Blue Review. Check that out. And if anybody else wants to show up on Friday, we'll do another Ohio State, Michigan live stream then. There is other college football going on, and we will get to that later today. We've got Nebraska live at 4, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. We've got Chris jumping on the line here. Welcome in, Chris. How you doing?
I missed the part of it that prior to right now. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just kind of jumping in. I don't know if what I'm saying is going to make sense or not because I didn't catch the earlier part of your show. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
How you doing?
And I don't want to waste your time either because you've already kind of covered all this. But I just thought I'd let everybody know by the metric that I use, which, like I said, people might not like it. So what we're really talking about is actually a title game between. I mean that's kind of like, I know people are going to say, well, duh, or whatever, but it's actually like a championship game between Michigan and Ohio State. So it's almost like a BCS title game. It's kind of what it's like, even though it's not in the BCS. So, I guess people can weigh that into, I know with a playoff that changes everything. It's like, okay, well, so what? Because really it isn't because of the playoff and this and that or whatever. But as far as the way I go about it, I guess, this would like eliminate in a BCS, I guess, situation. This would actually eliminate one of the teams. And I know we don't use the BCS. I know that's not protocol anymore, and it probably isn't even really worth talking about. But I still think the BCS was the right way to go. And so I think what it would do if we had it, which I'm not saying we should, but I'm just saying if we had it, it would maybe elevate the way the game itself. I think more people, I'm not saying they wouldn't be interested in anyway, but might elevate it a little bit higher than it would be otherwise. I don't know if you agree with that. I thought I'd just kind of ask what you thought about that.
You're talking about Ohio State and Michigan?
Well, yeah, the protocol that I use has them. I can't think it's Michigan number one, Ohio State number 2. So it's like a the BCS was always about putting the top 2 teams together, right? Yeah. So I know this isn't the BCS, and I know the playoff changes everything, but if it was like the BCS, then it would almost be like a national championship game in the regular season.
It would be difficult to heighten the focus on this game and the attention on this game. That would be tough to do.
Well, I'm just saying, though, I mean, in an ordinary situation, I guess, or I don't know if it's ordinary, but one team would probably be eliminated by this for the championship is what I'm trying to say. I know with the playoff,
most likely one of them will be, the loser will be, most likely, but there are other qualifying factors.
That's
other
what I'm not
games
sure
going
on. With the playoff, I'm not so sure that it does. That's kind of what I'm trying to say is it might not. It might. I mean, it might. Don't get me wrong. It might, especially with the number of good teams that we have. But there's the outside chance it might not too.
Oh, there's a small chance that it might not. But we don't have the same situation as we had last year where Ohio State lost but still made the playoff. But we had 3 lost champions or 2 or 3 lost champions in the Pac-12 and the ACC. And that doesn't appear to be the case this year. And that's what allowed Ohio State to get back into it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're asking me about something I don't really follow that. I mean, as far as I don't know, maybe you can explain to me why Ohio State still advanced. I don't know. Maybe I should probably know, but honestly, was there not another team, I guess, as qualified as Ohio State was? I don't really understand what qualifies a team and what doesn't. Maybe you can help me with that.
Well, there was more to it than this, but basically they had the best record in the country of anyone who did not win a conference.
So they looked at, you can maybe tell me then what they were looking at. It wasn't just that they lost to Michigan. It was that they had other good wins. Is that kind of what it was?
Sure.
Is that what they're using now? Because like I said, I tried to talk to you about it yesterday, but I know, for example, and I don't like using teams as an example. I don't really think it's fair to the team. You know what I mean? It's like in Louisville's case, it's like, well, maybe, we don't know. Maybe Louisville's a lot better but their schedule, I guess, doesn't really, of course, they lost a game, but which is kind of strange that they would have lost that game. Is there like a good I mean, maybe, because I don't understand it. I would think that if they could beat a Notre Dame, I wouldn't think they'd have a hard time putting away a Pittsburgh, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, I guess I am wrong about it because is there an explanation for what might have contributed to that?
So Louisville losing to Pitt?
Or to anybody. I mean, yeah, I know it was to Pittsburgh, but I would
think.
Well,
first of all, Louisville's a really good team, of course, but they're not any kind of great, flawless team. So they were only a touchdown favorite in that game. And again, the metrics and the talent rankings show us that there's really not that much separation between Louisville and Pitt. So it wasn't a major surprise at the time as only a touchdown favorite. And teams have letdowns. We saw Auburn lose it as a 25-point favorite last weekend. So that happens.
You mean against New Mexico State?
Yes.
Is that the game? Well, again, that's the other thing. I kind of, if you don't mind, I know you have other things to do, and I don't want to waste your time on some of this, but see, I kind of look at things differently. I kind of look at it like, okay, so New Mexico State not only covered the spread, it's like they double covered it or something like that.
Yes.
So doesn't that kind of maybe, I don't know how to put it other than, does that kind of maybe show that maybe these point spreads aren't, I mean, I kind of look at it like, let's just say they'd have won 10-9 or something. Because instead of like, what was it, 31-10 or something like that?
Yeah.
I don't really think winning by a large margin really matters all that much, personally. Of course, I'm not involved with it, but, I know maybe in terms of making an evaluation on a team and kind of like, oh, well, they got to, I think what happens sometimes, I think like, especially in football, of course, I don't know a whole lot about football. You probably already know that because you're talking to me, but I kind of think some of it's like momentum, isn't it? I mean, you get that momentum train rolling along. I mean, and if you can't stop that momentum, I mean, you could probably blow a team away. But,
so I'll just say this in response to that, and then I'll need to move on, and I'll let you have the last say, Chris. So you don't think it tells us anything that Ohio State and Michigan beat Penn State by 8 or 9 points, but they beat everybody else that they played in the Big Ten by 30 or 40 points, and Penn State beat all those other teams as well. That doesn't show the separation between all those teams.
I guess, yeah, I'm sure it does. I don't necessarily even question what you're trying to say. I'm sure it probably does, Mark, but I guess at some point I just kind of question what that really means as far as, like, for example, I mean, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you brought it up, it's like Massachusetts losing to Penn State 63-0 or whatever it was. It's like at some point you could beat them 500-0, and it shows that Penn State's a lot better than Massachusetts, but it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that Massachusetts isn't worth a lick. I mean, I don't know. I just it's circumstantial. I mean, you probably catch Penn State when they're maybe really up, and maybe Massachusetts when they're not, So it's like, well, Massachusetts must be horrible, which they might, and there might be some truth to that. But I don't know. I guess I just kind of wonder if you look at it that in terms of like, okay, well, they beat them 100-0. Well, it's like at some point, I don't know what difference it really makes if you beat them 100-0, this maybe 6-0 or something like that. I mean, I know it makes a difference.
It's a big difference. And I also believe that if we say the term Massachusetts one more time, we'll probably lose 200 people in the next 5 seconds.
Well, that was just an example where one team rolled over.
Well, Chris, thanks for calling. We appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You too. All right, let's get to Ron here as soon as we cover this super chat. We appreciate this coming in from Mike. How did Ohio State fare against Maryland and Penn State at home? Michigan played both on the road before the Ohio State game. You guys seem to be counting on Michigan to play like they did against Maryland. Since you're making that a super chat, Mike, first, I appreciate that. Secondly, I guess that's targeted toward me. And not everyone else in the chat. I don't know anything that I've said that states that I expect Michigan to play Ohio State like they did against Maryland. If anything, I just stated about 5 minutes ago that we had a game against Illinois that Michigan played last year against a pretty comparable Illinois team to this year's Maryland team, probably a little bit better, but not much. And Michigan struggled in that game, and that had no impact on how they played against Ohio State. So I don't necessarily, I want to do your question justice here, but I'm not really understanding. I think all these results have to be taken into consideration. And the most meaningful result, for obvious reasons, I don't think I should have to explain it, is each team's game against Penn State is the most valid result. And then they both played 7 other teams. So they've got 7 common opponents. And I think they all tell us something. But you can't just flat out say Michigan won these games by these number of points and Ohio State by these number of points. Therefore, Michigan's better or Ohio State's better. That happened in 2018 where Michigan was better against its common opponents than Ohio State, and then Ohio State blew Michigan away. All right, let's move it on. We got Ron checking in from Best Damn Media. Ron, what's going on?
Hey, Mark, how's it going? I appreciate you having me.
Hey, appreciate you being here. Wanted to get your take. They're repping Best Damn Media, and of course, we've got Best Damn Media doing our Ohio State post game. So check them out on Best Damn Media right here on YouTube, and then for the Ohio State post game after every Buckeyes game. So as we get closer to kickoff, what's your overriding feeling going into this one?
I've tried to temper my expectations coming into this game. I was very confident the past 2 years and was humbled both years. So I've tried to not get out over my skis this year, but the more and more we get closer to the game, the Buckeye in me starts to come out, and I'm more and more confident about our Bucks. The one thing that really gives me confidence about the Buckeyes is the number 17. I've talked about it on every platform this season. The Buckeyes have not given up more than 17 points, and I believe that's going to hold true again on Saturday. And if Kyle McCord only has to put 20 points on the scoreboard, I think the Buckeyes can get it done. And we've yet to see a team put up more than 17 on the Buckeyes. So I think the Buckeyes are going to be able to get it done here on Saturday.
So we've got Notre Dame, Maryland, and we've got Penn State and I'm not going to go into, I know as soon as I mention those teams, I'm going to have a zillion comments that are going to say they're nowhere close to Michigan. So first of all, we're just talking about the offense here, the Michigan offense. And I would say that two of those three teams do have comparable talent. Now, I'm not saying their offense is as good at either Penn State or Notre Dame, but I'm saying that their talent is comparable to Michigan's. So I'm right there with you in regards to what the Ohio State defense could do against Michigan, a Michigan team that only scored 31. And what do we have? We had a scoop and score. We had a punt block for a safety. We had a lot of defensive generated points for Michigan last week against Maryland. So I don't think you're too crazy in saying that Ohio State could keep them maybe in that range if you tack on a touchdown, maybe.
My favorite stat going into this game is that J.J. McCarthy has thrown exactly 0 touchdowns since Connor Stallions has left the sidelines. Coincidence? I don't know.
Yes, well, we could also dive into that portion of it as well. I don't know how much good that's going to do. Let's see. We got Moose who says, Mark, your rankings are wrong from last night. My rankings? Wait a minute. I'm not doing the national rankings of strength of schedule and so forth. Anyway, you said Florida State ahead of Michigan because of strength of schedule. I found out Michigan strength of schedule 59, Florida State 62nd. So, Moose, you would have a valid comment there, except I didn't say anything about strength of schedule. I said best opponents. I said if you took a list of Michigan's best opponents, so let me put it this way. Ron, let's say your teams played 2 games and my teams played 2 games. And there's 133 teams out there. And your 2 opponents are 65th and 66th in total offense. And you're supposed to have one of the best teams in the country. And let's say my team took on the number 1 offense in the country and the number 133 offense in the country. Who do you think's played a tougher schedule?
The team that played the number 1 team.
Yes. So I know that's an egregious example, but basically my point is that if you're one of the best teams in the country, it doesn't matter if you're playing team number 98 or team number 122. It's not the same indifference that 24 spots is playing like the number 7 team in the country or the number 34 team in the country. You know, there's a difference there. And what I was stating is that I will take LSU, Clemson, NC State, trying to think who else Florida State's played. That's they've got about 6 opponents above bowl eligibility. Boston,
Miami,
one of the better ones. Miami, of course. Yeah, but LSU and Clemson off the top and a few others. I'm not selling it as a great schedule, but I will take that over Penn State that then drops to what's game number 2? Is it Maryland or is it Rutgers? It's one of those 2 that are 6-5. And that's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
when you brought up the best wins from Ohio State, I thought you were going to throw Rutgers in there because for the first 2 weeks of the college football playoff rankings, Michigan did have Rutgers as their best win. So
Yeah.
I didn't know if you would count that for the Buckeyes.
And I've had this argument with Michigan fans the whole season. Is it Michigan's fault? Well, yes and no. Conference schedule? No. Not their fault, not their problem. And as it all turned out, they played the same basic schedule as Ohio State, other than Ohio State playing. They played, both played Purdue and Minnesota. So Ohio State played who out of the West?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin,
Yep.
which looked like a much better win a few weeks ago than it is now. But still, Wisconsin, you put them in there, they're in that 6-5 classification too. So they might be second on Michigan's list of best wins, and they are certainly not Ohio State's. So again, or would be on Florida State. So Moose, I appreciate what you're doing there. I'm not saying that none of that is valid at all. I'm just saying that maybe Florida State, by playing North Alabama and playing a few other schools, they had another FCS school, has really weighted down their strength of schedule. But I'm not ranking the 2 schedules based on that. All right. If we can start with the first, what you would consider, Ron, biggest factor in this game, where would you start?
Limiting explosive plays. I think that's been the Achilles heel of Ohio State the past 2 years, and the reason why they have lost this game. And you saw the explosive plays last year and the role that they played in the game. I have like nightmares about last year's defenses because going into this game, everything that my eyes have shown me this year on film from Ohio State's team tells me that I shouldn't worry about their ability to tackle and the explosive plays because they've only given up 2 explosive plays this year over 40 yards. One of them was on a trick play. The other one was on Cameron Martinez, a player that doesn't really play that often against the Western Kentucky team. So to see them be able to really hold stout the entire season and not really let up at any point and give up those explosive plays makes me confident going into this game, despite my worries from last season and years past where the Buckeyes weren't able to tackle. And I've discussed this with a lot of people this week. Is my biggest fear for this defense is that they show up and just forget how to tackle, because that's like the analysis that I have is like nothing that I've seen from them shows me something that I should be concerned about going into Saturday. But if they for somehow revert back to the defenses of old of 2021 and 2022 and go out there and can't tackle in space, I think the Buckeyes will be in trouble. But I think the upgrades that they've made in the secondary are going to play such a huge role in this game. And I feel like my analysis for this game is very similar to that of the Penn State game. When I watch Penn State, I question, what are they going to go to on third down? You see Michigan run on 3rd and 9 against Penn State, a counter with the quarterback. And I'm like, you're not running on 3rd and 9 against Ohio State. I promise you that. You're not getting away with that. So I question their ability to throw the ball in obvious passing situations. And with the upgrades in secondary with Sonny Styles, Lathan Ransom's going to be out, but Josh Proctor, Jordan Hancock, you talk about 3 guys that are all going to play on Sundays one day, when last year you saw many guys out there missing tackles, and the reason for the explosive plays that aren't going to play on Sundays. Cameron Martinez, Tanner McAllister, Ronnie Hickman. Ronnie Hickman actually did get in for the Browns this past weekend, but a lot of these guys are undrafted free agents, where the guys in the secondary now are going to be draft picks and play early on Sundays once they get drafted. So I expect this defense to be much tougher this year and improve significantly when it comes to tackling.
Mike, thank you so much for the contribution, sir. We appreciate that. I hope the Ohio State team thinks sign stealing won those games will be a blowout for Michigan. Okay. All right. I don't know what to tell you about that, except the NCAA is taking care of that. The Big Ten has already addressed what the evidence is showing us to date. Therefore, they made a move. And Michigan, obviously, at some point thought it was pretty valid because they agreed to the suspension of their coach. So anyway, and then we are going to find out much more than that at some point. All right, Ron, I'm going to challenge you to look at this game from the other perspective, what concerns you about Ohio State pulling off a win? What do you think the biggest gaps are between Ohio State and Michigan to the negative side?
I would say the inconsistency of Kyle McCord, and I don't know how much of a gap it is because I feel like you could say the same thing about JJ McCarthy, and any Michigan fan that says they don't feel that way is delusional and hasn't been watching the past couple weeks, because he's clearly been just as inconsistent. But my worries about Kyle McCord is him turning the ball over, because throughout most of the season we discussed that Kyle's inconsistencies were tolerable because he wasn't turning the ball over. And then we saw that stretch of 2 games where he had a couple fumbles, 2 picks, and then a pick the following game. So to see him go from being inconsistent but protecting the ball to then having that little stretch where he turned the ball over, he seems to have righted the ship the past few weeks. And the Ohio State offensive line has really picked things up and kept Kyle much cleaner these past few weeks. So my biggest concern would be Kyle turning the ball over.
All right. I don't know if you can see the chat, Ron, but Michigan fans certainly showing up today. Live stream, and they're not happy with your analysis. But yeah, Kyle McCord, I do think that he's progressed through the season, but still throws a few balls in harm's way and misses a few other open receivers. Now, you're going to have that out of anyone to a certain extent. But yeah, CJ Stroud's pretty good. And as I like to remind, and have done this maybe 3 or 4 consecutive weeks on Twitter, when CJ Stroud is tearing up another NFL defense, that I thought it was just the most ridiculous thing when he threw like 4 passes his first preseason game and people were calling him a bust out there.
It's the Ohio State narrative. Everyone wants to believe that Ohio State doesn't produce quarterbacks. We were cut short of our opportunity to see what Dwayne Haskins would have been able to do in the NFL. I think he had a promising opportunity with the Steelers upcoming. Justin Fields seems to still be getting better despite the lack of resources and support that he has in Chicago. And now you see CJ Stroud lighting it up. I don't know if Kyle McCord has that same type of trajectory. We'll see if he's the quarterback here next year, and or if he enters the draft. But I feel like Ryan Day does have a track record that I don't know why you would bet against it, despite the struggles that we might have seen with Justin Fields early on in his career.
Last question, Ron. For a game that, as an Ohio State fan, I can't speak for the Michigan side because they seem, to a certain extent, many of them say that they, at times in the past, haven't cared that much about this game. When they were in the midst of a losing streak. But does this Saturday mean more or as much to you as any of the other ones during your lifetime?
I feel like this one means the most in my lifetime. I have been a casual observer from the outskirts of Pittsburgh. I have not lived within the rivalry. I just started media about a year ago. So now inserting myself into the rivalry in a public way has changed my feelings towards this rivalry significantly. I made a hype video for the game this week, and I'm just rewatching the games, and I'm like, man, we really used to just whoop them every year. And it was just like a holiday occasion. I have an uncle that's a Michigan fan, and we would always be together around the holidays. And I just knew I was going to get my jokes off at the end of the night and talk about how my team won. And these past 2 years, not only to have to suffer with Michigan fans on the timeline, but also do it in a public way, it has been miserable. So I know the players are like, you don't think that we want to win just as much as you? I'm like, I promise you, I really do want to win this game as much as I can. I can't get out there and do it myself, but I am going to be rooting like heck for my team. So this one means a lot, and it feels like a lot of Michigan fans think that football was invented after the pandemic. It has only been being played for 2 years, so it would be good to get a win on the record book in their minds.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of something I tweeted a few months ago that, man, I've never gotten this kind of response from a tweet, but I basically summarized the rivalry in terms of bragging rights by saying, if you are 3 years and under and you are a Michigan fan, then you have bragging rights. If you are over 100, if you are 100 or over and you're a Michigan fan, you have bragging rights. but anyone between the ages of 3 and 100 have bragging rights for Ohio State. And my goodness, yeah, I just got lambasted for that one, but I certainly backed it up with facts.
Absolutely. And I enjoy having my bragging rights as much as they would like to only count the last 2 years. I remember 20 years of domination.
And then they would counter with saying before that. So again, we can go on and on during the off season, folks.
I mean, we can start to counter the year I was born, and like you said, I'm not 3 and I'm not 100, so I still have my bragging rights regardless of the year.
All right, Ron, we appreciate you being here. Best Damn Media, it's right here on YouTube. Check it out. And Ron and the guys get together for Ohio State postgame over on the Ohio State channel. So we appreciate them being here for us as well. Ron, thanks for your time, and enjoy the game.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me, Mark.
All right, folks. I am 15 minutes away from going to Michigan Podcast to appear there with Steve Dace. So we got to knock off the Michigan Podcast appearance. Nebraska live at 4, Florida State live at 6, and Miami live at 7. Also got to record with Clemson and South Carolina coming up. So much to do here at the Voice of College Football. Be looking out for the videos and the live streams. Again, our next live stream is on the Nebraska channel at 4 Eastern. Be there as we break down the Huskers. And for you optimistic Michigan fans or optimistic Ohio State fans, you want to check that out because, of course, Nebraska is playing Iowa, the Western rep for the Big Ten championship game. So we will see you all in an hour.